Hello, good afternoon, everyone. It is a joy and pleasure to be joining you again for another conversation on home, a quest for meaning. We recently spoke about returning home to a long lost place. And this week we will be having a good girlfriend of mine, sister, everything, who we've had deep conversations around home. They're, although we come from different cultures, they're very similar. And so I'm excited to be welcoming my good friend and sister, Angela Adebex Lugo-Thomas, to this conversation about home today. I'm sure you will get so much out of it, and I hope that you share this with your friends and you have deeper conversations around home too. So, without further ado, I would like to welcome Angela to the stream. Hey, Angela, how are you?
Good. How's everybody? Hola.
Hola, how are you? I'm so glad to see you. I'm glad to be home. I'm glad that home is, so many different things to us. But I like to start every conversation that I have in this series of conversations by asking, what does home mean to you?
Whew, that's a big one right there because although I have not lived in what I call my home in more than 40 years, I still consider my birthplace home. And so I still consider Puerto Rico home.
Wow, wow. So Puerto Rico is home, and so I want to know a bit about your backstory because you and I talk about it, but I
Yeah.
find it so fascinating because when we talk about home, uh, I always think about how our ancestors a lot of times were ripped from their homes, but in this new generation, some of us left, whether it was by choice or by chance. Can you talk to me about that?
Yeah, so yeah, I didn't leave by choice. So as a 6.5-year old, I didn't have a choice on where we landed. But so at 6.5 in 1979, my mother and my father were not getting along anymore, and so she and my grandmother decided that she would leave Puerto Rico with my brother and I and relocate our family to Detroit, Michigan. Now, at the time that that happened, I did not know that that was going to be a permanent relocation. Um, they told us that we were just going to visit my grandmother in Detroit. And so I never even really questioned it. I was only 6.5. So I was just excited to get on the plane and go see my grandmother because I had only seen her at that point. I was, maybe 2 times in my life. I had seen her, maybe three if she came when I was a baby. So I was excited to come and visit Detroit. I had only been to Detroit one time prior to 1979, and we had a really fantastic time. So for me, it was just exciting to get on the plane, go see my grandmother, and little did we know that it was going to be a permanent move for us from Puerto Rico to Detroit.
So you say you left when you were 6.5, right? And so I'm curious about what kept you connected to that. Like, you're 6.5, you seem like maybe as a child you might have forgotten that, and then you just get into your new life and you're just into it. But what was that thing for you that kept
Yeah.
feeling like Puerto Rico was still home?
So leaving at 6.5, I actually did not go back to Puerto Rico for 10 years. So I went back at age 16. That was quite an adjustment. So I'll talk about that in a minute. But leaving as a 6.5-year old, I didn't speak English when I moved to Detroit. So I had to learn how to speak English. My name at the time was Atabex, which is my middle name now. So people, couldn't pronounce my name. They couldn't understand what I was saying most of the time. So just adjusting to being in Detroit with brown skin was like it was a difficult transition because there weren't a lot of people in Northwest Detroit with brown skin speaking Spanish with a
Right,
name like
right.
right with a name like Atabex. Okay,
I thought
so
that.
adjustment, right? But I just started learning English. I went to school. They had a bilingual program in the school on the northwest side of Detroit, and they had a little tiny classroom with about 10 to 12 students from all over the world, all of us in there trying to learn English. And that classroom was so uncomfortable, and so I don't know, we got into it with almost everybody from other countries. So I was so ready to get out of that classroom that my brother and I were the first two to what we call graduate out of that classroom and go into the regular room. So I was entering second grade and he was entering fourth grade. And so we try to just like try to learn as much as we could about where we were. We would pay attention to where we were when my mom and my grandmother drove around. So we tried to learn as much as we could about the place that we were now living once we realized that we were not going back home.
Right.
So it took a yeah, that was hard. And I can't really, I think I have like mental blocks on that because it was traumatic, I think, for me to learn that I wasn't going back to the place that I knew where all of my family lived. My mother was an only child and my grandmother was an only child. So we had no family here. Whereas in Puerto Rico, I had my grandmother, I had uncles, I had aunts, I had cousins. It was just a much different, family structure. And so leaving all of that behind, especially with the length of time that passed before we went back, that was very but eventually, you just kind of you like, okay, this is where we are, and then we just make friends, and you just build what you can here. But I never forgot that I was Puerto Rican. I never forgot where I came from. I longed for Puerto Rico every single day. I still do to this day. Everybody who knows me is like, like you would think I live in Puerto Rico sometimes because I talk about it all the time. But I love that island. I've never forgotten like what it felt like being there. And so going back after 10 years was really interesting because I was grasping at that point. I was grasping for memories. I was like, will I remember? And landing there was something pretty interesting. I can talk about that further.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a longing inside, a longing for, it sounds like community, like a longing for what was felt safe, because you're describing, being in a class where you didn't like it. So there's this longing for the things that make you feel safe. Like there's safety at home, there's safety with the people who love you, there's safety, and there's longing for that. And so that trauma, and America, US is kind of a place where it's like, okay, English. You're gonna,
Yep.
if you want to succeed, you better understand, write in English, speak in English. And so being able to be bilingual in that and have it honored.
It ended up happening is I lost my first language. I actually lost the ability to speak, write, read my first language. I could still understand it. Like if someone spoke it, I could understand what they're saying, but I was having a really hard time being able to communicate and the conjugations, because there's a lot of conjugations in Spanish. But the other part about it was that my grandmother here, which, my mom's mother, she didn't speak Spanish. She was born in Ohio, grew up in New York. Now she spoke French, but she didn't speak Spanish. And so it was a very difficult transition for us, but she pretty much forbade us to speak Spanish in front of her. And we lived with her. So it became this like almost like, well, we better, we had to kind of stop speaking Spanish because it made her feel a certain kind of way that she didn't understand what we were saying. And of course, years later, she would do things like want me to speak Spanish on the spot for her friends, and then I couldn't. And I'm like, you the same lady that told me not to speak this language. But then it became evident that, I think just because of the way that she grew up, she just didn't really know how to be a mother and a grandmother in a loving, nurturing way.
Yeah. So you go back at 16, and now you are now a mom of 3 children. Do you think that becoming a parent really further deepen that sense that I've got to reconnect to my culture so that I can do it for my kids? Like, was there something in that? Like, did mothering change that for you?
To a certain extent, yes, but it even happened before that. So when I went
Okay.
back in 1988, when I went back in 1988, we went back as suddenly as we left. Like literally, we were on the plane, and my mother called my family to tell them, "Well, you can pick them up at," and they didn't know we were coming back. Like they didn't,
Also,
they didn't know we
you
were
went
coming
back to
back
Puerto
either.
Rico, and they had no clue that you were showing up. Wow,
Yes.
unprotected.
So it was a weird situation, and we were sent back to stay. My mother had had enough of me and my brother. We were like two peas in a pod. We always was getting in trouble. So she was like, I'm sending y'all back to your father. And we were supposed to go back to stay. Long story short, I was like, I'm not staying because I hadn't really like reconnected with them. I hadn't talked to them. 10 years went by. They had never come to Detroit. None of them. My father, my grandmother, my aunts, uncles, cousins, nobody had come to see us. And we hadn't seen them anywhere, not even in Chicago or New York, anywhere. So
Wow.
I even glad to be back. I still was like, this is not where I want to be. I was at Cass. I wanted to finish Cass Tech. I had a life in Detroit. So why would I stay there? Right. So when I landed, I didn't even know who to look for. Like literally, I landed and I was like, who am I looking for? Because I was like, I don't know what my dad looked like. Like that's how it was when I
That's
landed.
how,
So
wow, the separation.
yeah, but he saw me and he was like, I look like my mom. So he knew exactly who I was. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. So long story short, from that point on, when I reconnected with my grandmother, we stayed at the house that I grew up in. She bought, I mean not bought, but she moved into it. So she was living in the house where we last lived. So that's the house that was in our family for over 40 years. So when she came home, she was on a cruise when we landed. So she didn't even know we were here. We were in PR. And she came home and she was in shock, right? But the saddest part was I couldn't talk to her without somebody
Oh my goodness,
translating.
translating.
And that was the moment where I was like, oh my goodness, I have to learn Spanish. Like literally, that was the moment that I was like, I got to reconnect with my culture. I got to learn Spanish, the music. I always loved the food and missed the food. So that wasn't the issue, but I didn't cook the food or anything, but it was like I needed to reconnect. So that was at 16 on until now. I
And so
always try to,
16 was the moment that you're just like, okay, I'm doing this.
yeah,
How did
yeah,
you start to rebuild those lost year, like those lost things? How did you start?
yeah. So I started taking classes. Believe it or not, I took Spanish classes.
I find that so hard to believe because it flows off your tongue like
I
music.
know. And then it was really really difficult because being Puerto Rican and having to take Spanish classes, remembering that was my first language, I was always getting in trouble because I would be correcting the teacher because most of them were not native speakers. So I'd be like, nope, that's wrong. Nope, no, that's not how we do it. But then I started to learn about the different dialects. That Spanish in
Right,
Mexico has some different words than Spanish in South America and then Spanish in Puerto Rico. So I had to learn that, but there were some things that they were just doing wrong. And so I would always get kicked out of class. I was always getting kicked out. And so finally, I just kept doing. I took Spanish classes from that point all the way through college. I even took Spanish classes in college. And then I listened to the music all the time. I would sometimes watch Spanish television just to hear it, listen to the radio. And I tried to go home as often as I could. So
yes, that
that's
part.
people laugh to this day. I ain't really been nowhere else because every chance that I can get a break where I have either the money or the time, I go to Puerto Rico. I don't go nowhere else.
You
So
go
I
home.
so I never been to Mexico. I never been to. I didn't been to South or Central America. I never been to Arizona. To I'm saying, to Utah. None of that stuff because every time I get a break, I'm like, I gotta go home. So that's what I do. So that's how we connected. So I was going home pretty much annually.
Wow.
It's why we connected to my abuela. I mean, we ended up being extremely close. My aunts, so that built that relationship back up. My father and I, we still, we had a good relationship, but then it kind of frayed a little bit towards the end of his life. And so, you just do the best you can. But then, now at this point, when I had the girls, like I took Jamela when she was little, but the youngest two have not been as often. And I really
Right.
want to change that, because when I tell you we went as a family in 2019, it was December 2019.
Oh, right before things kicked off.
Yep. And when I tell you they all loved it, you would think that they were from Puerto Rico. Like, it was crazy. So that's why I always say that DNA has got to be in there, because
It
they
is.
loved everything about Puerto Rico. And they cannot wait to go back. And I can't wait till I can go back with them.
So it sounds like, again, passing the culture, the decision you made at 16 to say consciously, I'm going to connect to this, has had like far reaching effects to your family, to,
Yes.
to your soul. Like, I see it when I see you, I feel like I see Puerto Rico first. Like, I see that in you. I mean, all the time. Culture, the food. Do you cook the food at home? Do you?
You know, look, but when I really, really like try, I could probably pull it off. The main thing I make is tostones, which is the smashed plantains. That's the main thing I make, like that from Puerto Rico. But if I wanted to, I probably could do it. And actually, that's one of the goals I have now, is I need to just go ahead, break out the cookbooks and start cooking some food, because I do miss it. And it's nothing like really home cooking, as the island
Oh,
cooking.
absolutely.
You can't find that here in Detroit. I mean, it's just, no matter what I mean, they may try, but it's never going to be like that.
Right. I mean, well, it's the growing of the culancho, the cilantro. We talk about that. How, there's so many similarities in Caribbean culture. Whether you're from Puerto Rico, from the Caribbean, we have found things that are so alike. And that, as a person who moved to Detroit from Canada through the Caribbean, when I was there, I think talking to you really made me feel at home, because I realized there's so many similarities to the experience of being from the Caribbean.
Yeah,
You know, whether it's food, whether it's culture, whether
absolutely.
it's that longing, that constant longing. I'm like you. Any opportunity I get, I'm coming home. I'm coming home, right? So,
Yes.
what does the future of home look like for you? What do you, if you could wave a magic wand, what would your
Woo.
life? No, because I can put it out there, because you look doggone good. We're on the other half of we're in our second adolescence. Let's call it that. So magic
Yes.
wand, and you can be between Detroit and you can be between Puerto Rico. What does that look like for you? What does the future of home look like for you?
Yeah, so I always imagine that I will live a portion of the year in Puerto Rico and a portion of the year in Detroit. And the portion of the year in Puerto Rico would be much longer than the portion in
Cold
Detroit.
months.
So we'll see. I don't know. I mean, I know that things are changing on the island. I was luckily I was able to go. It was for a conference, but I was able to go in February. And things have changed. That's all I can tell you. Gentrification is real. It's here, and displacement and things are just not going to be as available as they once were. And unfortunately, because my family sold the home that we probably could have kept in our family for for generations to come, they sold that home. And so I don't know if I'm going to even be able to afford to be able to buy a home there. I hope to be able to buy a home there, so that we always have a place that we can go and escape this cold weather here in Detroit.
Yeah, because I think it's something to be said about returning home as a tourist, or returning home as a person without a village. For
Yeah.
people who have had 400 years of displacement, going home and being at home in community where you're from, it hits different. It's so important to your, to who you are. Like,
Yep.
it's something. I. I saw you strolling the streets of Puerto Rico when you did go in February, and I saw the likeness. I mean, you were just like in
Yeah.
your element, you know?
I was home. This is home. Especially, look, I even went to the mountains. Now, most people they never venture out the metropolitan area when they go to Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is
Right.
it's a small. They call it a small island, but every area is different. But the mountain driving was woo. It
So
was
did you
so
drive there?
absolutely breathtaking, and I was like, yeah,
Wow.
yeah. I've actually every time I've gone, except for that 1988. I think it might have been the only time I didn't drive there. But yeah, every time I've gone to PR, I've always had my own like rental car.
Wow. So I like that you're bringing a lot of Puerto Rico to Detroit. I see so many similarities in the work that you do, um, the way it shows up in community building, right? And so I know you have some exciting projects and things that you're working on. Tell me how um, going back home really gave you a new focus on the project you're working on. And tell us about the project.
Yeah. So for this probably has been about 5 years or so. A few of us, I'll say a few of us, Detroit Puerto Ricans, have been discussing doing some kind of like bridging of Puerto Rico and Detroit because we both we live in Detroit, but we are from Puerto Rico. So we are started quite a few projects, but the two that I'll mention is we have a casita project in Southwest Detroit, and it's called La Casita Cimarron y Yuquetí de Detroit. And that is a space that we're developing that will allow us to celebrate Puerto Rican culture in Detroit, however that looks like. So we'll be able to not only celebrate it for ourselves to come in community as Puerto Ricans in Detroit, but also for anyone who may be interested in knowing more, or maybe they also are familiar with Puerto Rico because they've been there, or they've had some kind of friend or family that is Puerto Rican, and maybe they might want to come and also listen to a book talk, or take some bomba dance classes or drum classes, or
Right.
maybe they want to do some kind of art that's Puerto Rican based. So we are developing that space now. It's going to be a really fascinating project, but it's in its early infancy still, but we are getting support from a couple foundations to keep that work going. And then the second project is actually my baby,
Oh,
and that's the Boricua Garden project, and that's going to be in Highland Park. And it's something that I've been wanting to do for a long time, and it's going to be another space where we celebrate the Puerto Rican culture. Boricuas are the original name of Puerto Ricans because it
right.
is Taino nation. And Borinquen, it's the name of Puerto Rico before the name was changed. So Boricua is, the original inhabitants of Puerto Rico. So that's why it's called Boricua Garden. But I hope to have a space that's almost like an oasis here. It's going to have like a tropical look to it. Obviously we can't have every tropical plant in it, but I'm gonna try. But I'm gonna have plants, and there's gonna be art in the space, and then we're gonna be able to hold events and dinners. I want to do some, Puerto Rican dinners, and just really enjoy our culture and expose, the community here in Highland Park and the surrounding community to Puerto Rican culture. So that's my baby. Yeah.
Oh, I'm so excited about that. I think, culture is the connector. Culture is the connector. It's the connector even when we're far away from home. If you can eat your food and you can drink your drinks and you can do your dances and you can sing your songs,
Yes.
it feeds you until you can set foot back at home. So when I hear that
That,
you're doing that, that's powerful. That's so powerful. And I
and that's
know,
the
yeah, go ahead.
No, that's the key. That's the what we all long for. Like you were saying, we long for home. We miss it. We don't get to experience it much when we're here. There aren't really like, Chicago, New York. Um, there's some parts of, California, even in Texas. They have strong Puerto Rican communities. you don't really hear that as much here in Detroit. You hear more of the Mexican community, which is the largest, community that is from the Spanish speaking world. So but there are a lot of us here. We're all kind of all over the place. So we are trying to bring that unity, like bring us back together and be able to create our own kind of like Puerto Rican family here, so that we can kind of, do our thing here in Detroit and have fun and then get back to the island as much as we can too.
Exactly. So I feel like, the older I get, the more I feel like I will spend more time here at home. I'm literally
Yep.
here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines now. I long for it more the older I get. I see myself being here more. So do you see yourself one day being an abuela in Puerto Rico where your daughters will come and bring theirs?
Absolutely love that. I cannot wait till that day comes, because I think I always feel like I always want to go back to the place where I was born and actually live there and feel like I belong there. Like it's my home. It's where I'm gonna, be. Around my own people, around what I feel is my I don't know, it's like it's this thing where, like you said, when you saw my videos and it's like it's something about being in that space that nothing compares to it. Nothing compares to it. And I long for that every single day. I wake up like, why am I here? Why am I in
Hey,
Detroit? Why am
I,
I here?
I feel my heart breaks for our ancestors
Yes.
who left, you know, Africa, who were brought on a ship and didn't
Absolutely.
even know where they were going, right? And
Yeah.
they landed in a place that they had to make home. And
There you
and I see what's happening now in this generation. I feel like our ancestors are actually loving all of this. They see us making steps to get back to what
yes.
they never had an opportunity to do, like
Yeah.
to never live free, to never have those options. So to have the options, to be able to exercise them, to be able to dream and build community, I'm so, like, to me, that I think that's everything. And I say that with that heart, because when I set foot here, I think about my ancestors.
Yep. You
You know,
can't
and
help but do that.
you
You
can't.
can't, right? And that's
That's
why I'm still along to go to Africa, because I've never been to Africa. And I feel like that's going to have the same effect on me, because sometimes when I see photos of Africa, I was like, that looks like Puerto Rico. Like literally, you know what I'm saying?
exactly.
It blows my mind, because I'm like, that's why so many of our people ended up in the islands, because it was so familiar and so similar, and so now I'm starting to understand that. But I hear that the minute you touch that soil on the mother in the motherland,
Mm,
it's just something comes through you. And so I feel like I can't wait to that I can experience that as well. Even
ab-
it was funny because a few people, of course, they called me and let me know that they didn't realize that one scene in Black Panther was shot in Puerto Rico. And and people didn't realize. I'm like,
wow.
yeah. And I almost didn't realize, but I literally was at the theater looking at it like, damn, that looked familiar. Like I was like, that almost looks like Puerto Rico. And I didn't even know it was
And
Puerto
it
Rico.
was.
Yeah, and it was Puerto Rico.
Because it's familiar. It's familiar. And so, I encourage our listeners, I encourage you, I encourage myself, if nothing else, keep culture strong. You do that for yours, keep culture strong. That calling you had at 16 that said, I've got to go back and get it. It's the
Yep.
Sankofa bird. Like, I'm moving forward, but I got to go back and get it. I've got to get it. I'm so thankful you have, because I think everybody benefits when we do that. Everybody benefits when we reconnect. I guess I have one other question. When you go home, is there ever this sense that people think you're too, well, Puerto Rican is part of America, so I'm going to be clear.
No,
Where
you're
they
right.
act like, oh, you're kind of New Yorkie or
Yes,
Detroity.
yes,
You know what I'm
very much.
saying?
It's very fascinating, because I had, when I was a little bit younger, I had that whole like dynamic where when I was here, it was this whole thing where I wasn't black because I spoke Spanish, right? But then when I
Hmm.
there, it was this whole thing like, oh, you're from, you're not from here, so you're not Puerto Rican. And I'm like, So I remember my father having to like check some folks because I actually was born there. So I have a birth certificate that says I was born there. So he would
Right.
tell like, she more Puerto Rican than you because she was actually born so yeah, I get that, and but it doesn't bother me at all. Like I say stuff wrong all the time. It doesn't bother me. Like if I say something, well, I just tell people just correct me. I don't trip about if I make a mistake speaking Spanish or if I don't know the word. But yeah, there's people there that of course they look at you, kind of like suspect. But I would say overwhelmingly if you go to Puerto Rico, you are embraced and you're welcome. They're very nice people, whether you speak Spanish or not. Most people actually speak English, even in the mountains. So it's not like that kind of place, but it's a very welcoming place, and most of the people are very, very nice and very helpful. So I've never really had a major problem.
Well, that's good.
But
And I'm looking forward to going to Puerto Rico with you. And I'm looking forward
yes,
for you coming to St. Vincent with me. I think, the more we do this, I'm looking forward to visiting all the people that I see. I love social media for that because it gives us insight. It gives me access. Like when you were in Puerto Rico, I woke up every day to see where we were going that day. I'm like, okay, where are we going today? So I thank you for taking us on the
yeah,
journey. I thank you for taking us always with you, and the work you do in photography and art. Like you got an eye, sister, for that. So you really are able to showcase, your island in a way that's just phenomenal, and all the work you do.
thank you. Yeah, it was fun. I got to write about Casa Pueblo for Planet Detroit and tie in the work that Solidarity is doing in Highland Park. That was my last article, and it was like I felt like like to
Yeah.
bridge that gap, the connection even more. And I was like, that was like really cool, and I hope to be able to write stories like that in the future as well.
So sweet. So if people want to see your work, hear about what you're doing, what is the best way for people to connect with you? And I'll actually, when we broadcast, I'll make sure I have a slide of that. But what's the best way for people to find you, find your work, read that article? Tell us. You there? All right.
I think you're
Yeah,
breaking
can you
up,
hear
but
me?
I said what's
It might be me.
I
Yeah.
think I do. I can hear
Okay.
you. The best way to contact me.
Yeah.
Okay,
Through
I'm on
for
social media, but I don't really pay attention to that stuff, even though I am on there. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, Detroit Boricua, Boricua, and I'm on Facebook, Angela Lugo-Thomas. But I do write for a online publication called Planet Detroit, so you can check out all my articles on planetdetroit.org. And then I'm just involved with a bunch of different activities here in Detroit. So I try to keep myself busy. I wish I could get paid for all the stuff I do. I'll be all right. Then I'll be able to buy my house in PR.
absolutely.
But
Hey, but things gonna work out because our currency, like current, that's a whole other conversation. But we find ways to get home, and we know that our ancestors set the path. So what is supposed to be aligned for us to do, it works out, sis. We know that. We know
yes,
that, and I stay in that. I stay in that faith because, I would do nothing if I was totally relying on this on the money I make. So I
right.
rely on I rely on the things that our ancestors did, and they were strong in community, and they were strong. They were rich in community. They were rich in family. They were rich in helping one another, and so that to me is still critical work. It's still critical work. So I want to thank you for taking the time to talk to me today. I cannot wait to go with you to Puerto Rico one day. I'm looking forward to it. I have been looking forward to that forever. And now
All
that we're
right.
both newly minted middle-aged teenagers, hey, a little bit of empty house. I know you got a few more years to go, but you were almost there.
Yeah.
And so I look forward to that. And I want to thank you. Thank you for sharing your culture. Thank you for sharing your gifts
Oh, no
always.
problem. And I can't wait to visit your home. I tell people all the time, like, I just want to go to every Caribbean island I can because I think they're awesome,
Absolutely.
but they're so beautiful. I just love islands.
Absolutely. Me too. So I love you. Take care. And I will talk to you soon. Peace.
Okay, adios, gracias.
All right. And so again, want to so much thank Angela for joining me today. What an amazing connection to culture and to home. And I hope you continue to join us for our conversations around home. We're all trying to find our way back. We're all trying to find our way to. We're all in a move that, once we settle in and we find ourselves, we find our place that makes us feel like home, we know it. We know it. Peace, you guys. I will talk to you soon. Looking forward to another episode of Home, A Quest for Meaning. Peace.